I officially transferred ownership of our house to my parents, and James and I were on the verge of divorce. With a cold, detached expression, he pointed at me and curtly ordered me to leave. His words were sharp, laced with disdain, while his parents looked on, their approving smiles silently reinforcing his cruelty. But I remained unshaken. Their words held no power over me. I had anticipated this moment, prepared my luggage in advance, and walked out without hesitation. They had no idea what awaited them. My name is Sally, and I just turned 50. Many years have passed since our marriage, and our children have grown independent, living their own lives. I once lived the routine of an ordinary salaried worker, but through a friend's recommendation, I discovered a new path, teaching handmade accessories, a hobby that became my profession. This career shift marked a turning point in my life, bringing fulfillment through creativity and meaningful interactions with my students. Some may doubt the idea of turning a hobby into a livelihood, but I am content. James and I met by chance at my former company. He worked at a client firm, and through frequent work-related gatherings, our relationship blossomed. We married for love. 3 years into our marriage, we welcomed a healthy, énergétique son. He graduated from a prestigious university and is now happily married, thriving in his own world. Yet, despite our son's success, the joy between James and me gradually faded. Over time, James changed. The once kind and considerate man I married became demanding and dismissive, treating me as little more than a housemaid. His ever-shifting expectations exhausted me. Lately, he had grown easily angered, blaming me for trivial matters, and his verbal abuse became more frequent. I longed to escape and start anew, but the burden of an unpaid mortgage held me back. To make matters worse, James quit his job without explanation and spent his days idling at home, refusing to contribute to household responsibilities. I was left to manage everything alone. The house we lived in was newly rebuilt, a project I had painstakingly funded. I had saved diligently, ensuring its reconstruction met my vision. It wasn't just a house, it was the culmination of my efforts, my dreams. I refused to let James claim it if I left. While he initially provided input on the design, I had financed every aspect of the project. The spacious kitchen, the carefully selected features, each element was a reflection of my aspirations. When the house was finally completed, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. However, the costs had far exceeded our estimates, forcing us to take on a larger loan than expected. Taking on such financial responsibility in our 50s was daunting, but the dream of a beautiful home had given me the strength to move forward. James, however, sulked. His opinions had not been fully incorporated into the design, and he saw the project as an unnecessary expense, a waste of money. Frustrated and resentful, he stopped speaking to me and resorted to petty, childish behaviors, scattering trash, leaving things in disarray, doing whatever he could to provoke me. Each day, I found myself wondering when this life would finally come to an end. A few months after moving in, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. We weren't expecting visitors. Curious, I made my way to the front door, unaware that this moment would change everything. James surprisingly got up and headed toward the entrance before I could even move, almost as if he knew who was coming. After a short while, cheerful voices and laughter filled the air from the door. When it finally creaked open to reveal the visitors, I was met with the faces of my unexpected in-laws, Harold and Alice. To be honest, I always felt an undercurrent of tension around them. When we first announced our marriage, they barely hid their disdain for me. They criticized my lower social standing, kept their distance, and maintained an awkwardness that lingered even on our wedding day. Their interference didn't stop after the ceremony, and every interaction with them felt like walking on eggshells, wondering how best to navigate their subtle judgments. I'd hoped that, with time and less frequent contact, things would have settled, but their sudden visit caught me off guard. I greeted them as politely as I could, despite the familiar tension creeping up. Yet, they didn't respond in kind. They passed me by without a word, almost deliberately ignoring me, their shoulders brushing against mine. They couldn't help but marvel at the house, throwing out compliments about the spacious kitchen as though it were some rare treasure. James, ever proud, showed them around the house, eager to impress. When they left, their faces seemed satisfied, but James's expression quickly darkened. Without warning, he raised his voice, barking at me to hurry up and prepare tea and snacks. Caught off guard by his sudden anger, I scrambled to comply, hastily preparing everything, but no matter how much effort I put into it, they weren't impressed. Harold grumbled under his breath, clearly dissatisfied, and the tea and snacks barely lasted before they were dismissed. James, with a grin plastered across his face, suggested his parents move in with us, his words completely sidelining me. They nodded approvingly and left, with me standing there, watching them walk away. A pang of realization hit me as I saw James laughing and chatting with his parents, so carefree, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Their visits became a regular occurrence after that, initially a few times a month, but soon it was several times a week, and eventually, nearly every day. Their constant presence was overwhelming, and yet, their criticisms of me never wavered. James, too, seemed to only get harsher, blaming me for every issue that came our way, including the strain on our son. His words stung as he accused me of not listening, of somehow causing harm to our family. I tried to keep my composure, unable to express the frustration that simmered inside me. All I could do was apologize, though it didn't seem to make any difference. The visits didn't stop at their usual times. They began showing up whenever I was gone, leaving signs of their presence everywhere. Empty beer cans, discarded bottles, and patches of spilled alcohol marked their trail through our house, even seeping into the new rug. The once pristine home began to smell of liquor and felt far from welcoming. James, meanwhile, seemed to forget his role in maintaining the household. His gambling habits only added to the chaos, with betting slips constantly appearing, and the financial strain it caused was unbearable. I tried to talk to him about it, tried to make him understand how deep the consequences ran, but my words felt like they were falling on deaf ears. The losses were devastating, especially when the money he gambled away came from my hard work. After nearly a month of this escalating pattern, the in-laws began to target the times when I was out. One afternoon, I returned home early and was stunned to find them lounging around the house, as if it were their own. I confronted them, but their dismissive responses and condescending smiles made it clear they had no regard for my presence. I couldn't take it anymore. The tension between James, his parents, and me had reached its breaking point. Rather than letting my emotions take over, I decided it was time to devise a plan, to take control of the situation. Then something strange happened. During one of my scheduled absences, the in-laws showed up unannounced. Their timing was off, and I couldn't help but comment sarcastically about their deliberate avoidance of me. They ignored my remark completely, striding into the house with an air of entitlement. James greeted them with his usual warmth and led them through every corner of the house, from the kitchen to the bathroom. I watched them carefully, my suspicions growing. They were inspecting every detail, as if they had something to confirm. By the time they left, they wore smug expressions, clearly pleased with whatever they had uncovered. Something was definitely off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their visit than met the eye. 2 of 2. I couldn't ignore their meticulous inspections, and suspicion gnawed at me. Were they hiding something? When I confronted James about it, he dismissed my concerns with an impatient wave. "It's none of your business," he said curtly, but his avoidance only deepened my unease. He was clearly concealing something, I just couldn't figure out what. With no choice but to observe, I decided to wait for the truth to reveal itself. Then, one evening after work, I returned home to an unsettling sight, a large moving truck parked in front of our house, its side emblazoned with the logo of Moving Center. James stood outside, speaking with the driver and a few company representatives. The moment our eyes met, he averted his gaze and disappeared into the house. Before I could process what was happening, my in-laws arrived, greeting me casually, as if their presence was nothing out of the ordinary. James welcomed them with open arms, leading them inside. A strange tension hung in the air. As I stepped in, my stomach twisted at what I saw: the furniture, the decor, the little touches that made this house my home, all gone. In their place stood my in-laws' old, outdated belongings, arranged as if they had been living there for years. I sat down, forcing myself to stay calm. My in-laws circled me, smirking, their satisfaction evident. This was planned, this was deliberate. Though anxiety swelled within me, I kept my expression neutral, waiting to see where this charade would lead. Then, with an almost theatrical sigh, James finally spoke. "I sold the house," he admitted, his voice void of remorse, "to my parents." A beat of silence passed before he continued, his tone casual, as if announcing dinner plans. "And, well, I think it's best if we get a divorce." His parents nodded in agreement, their smug expressions daring me to react. But I didn't flinch. I had seen this coming. Without hesitation, I picked up the divorce papers he slid toward me, signed them swiftly, and placed my wedding ring on the table. "I'll be leaving, then," I said coolly. Their smirks wavered, clearly expecting a different response. What they didn't know was that I had prepared for this moment. Their frequent, oddly timed visits had set off alarms in my mind, prompting me to install surveillance cameras around the house. It wasn't long before I uncovered footage of James and his parents gleefully discussing their scheme, selling the house and forcing me out. Anticipating their betrayal, I had taken the necessary steps. I legally transferred the mortgage entirely into James's name before they could act. If they wanted the house, they could take full responsibility for its financial burden. The mortgage payments, $1,900 a month, had always come from my hard-earned salary. Without my support, I doubted they could keep up. With a clear conscience, I walked away from the toxicity, moving into a new, peaceful home furnished exactly to my liking. I embraced my newfound independence, relishing the quiet mornings where I could finally sleep in. But peace was short-lived. On my day off, as I prepared to enjoy a long, uninterrupted rest, The doorbell rang. Annoyed, I dragged myself to the door, only to find James and his in-laws standing there, uninvited. Their expressions were frantic, panicked. Without waiting for an invitation, they barged in, slamming a document in front of me. "You changed the name on the house loan without permission," James accused, his voice shaking with fury. Feigning surprise, I leaned back, arms crossed. I had every right to. The house was mine to begin with. Their faces paled. I soon learned that, shortly after I left, they had received official notice of the mortgage transfer, and now, reality had hit them, hard. "We can't afford that kind of money," James shouted, his desperation thinly veiled behind anger. His parents echoed his distress, admitting they were all unemployed with no savings to fall back on. I remained unfazed. "Then you'll need to find a way to pay it," I replied, watching their growing panic. "Because if you don't, the bank will take the house." James scoffed, dismissing my words, until he frantically searched online and saw the brutal truth for himself. Late fees, interest hikes, the looming threat of foreclosure, his face contorted with horror. His mother clutched his arm. "What do we do?" she whispered. I sighed, offering a simple, logical solution: find jobs, work hard, like the rest of us. But my advice only deepened their despair. James confessed he was drowning in gambling debt, with no steady income to rely on. His parents had nothing to their name. They had gambled everything on their scheme to oust me, only to find themselves trapped in their own mess. Their pleas began, pathetic, desperate attempts to rekindle old ties. "We've been together for so long," James said weakly. "Doesn't that mean anything?" I scoffed. "Not anymore." Without another word, I shut the door in their faces. In one last act of pettiness, they tried to report me to the police, but with no legal grounds. They were promptly dismissed. The inevitable happened. Unable to keep up with payments, they lost the house and were forced to move into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. James found a part-time job, barely scraping by. Meanwhile, I flourished. With my newfound freedom, I focused on my career and started a handmade crafts blog. To my delight, it gained traction, and soon, my side passion doubled my monthly income. I was even invited to lead workshops and courses. As for love, I had no intention of remarrying. My future was mine alone to shape. One day, as I tidied my bookshelf, my fingers brushed against an old household account book from the early days of my marriage. Flipping through the pages, memories surfaced, of financial struggles, sacrifices, and the slow erosion of trust. But rather than sadness, I felt only relief. With a quiet smile, I placed the book back on the shelf, turning toward the bright future ahead.